First tonight, the exiled Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado has said the removal from power of President Nicolas Maduro by U.S. special forces is a huge step for freedom. But she said the interim president, Delcy Rodriguez, was one of the main architects of torture, corruption and narco-trafficking in the Maduro administration. Ms. Machado expressed support for President Trump, even though he's declined to back the Nobel Peace Prize winner, becoming Venezuela's new leader. Meanwhile, thousands of supporters of Nicolas Maduro have rallied in the Venezuelan capital Caracas to demand he be returned from the United States, where he's appeared in court. At the hearing in New York, Mr. Maduro described his seizure by U.S. forces on Saturday as a kidnapping. He and his wife are facing charges of narco-terrorism, conspiracy and weapons charges.
Today we have a fundamental commitment with the homeland, which is the restart of the National Assembly. The restart of the National Assembly for the 2026 to 2031 period, and we must carry out this demonstration in support for that important body of our government, of our state. That is why today we are going to march to the National Assembly to give backing to the women and men, deputies that we elected on the 25th of May, 2025. We are going so that this legislative body is formed in the usual and normal way, as it should be. And so that it is a space for discussion and debate about the challenges facing the homeland.
We are committed, and if we have to give our lives for the president, so that they return him to us, we will. But the streets belong to the people and not to the empire, because we are free, we are sovereign, and no empire is going to come and rule us, because this homeland is ours. This oil is ours. Because we are not to blame for the ambitions of a man who has been a criminal, a sex offender who is on the Epstein list, and who has the nerve to come and humiliate our president. That is unforgivable, and our people will not forgive. Our people will make him pay, because we are committed to Nicolas Maduro and to Celia. Our people are in the streets until they return him to us, because we are not going to get tired, we are not going to cry. And if we have to die for this homeland, we will die.
Well, the U.S. seizure of Mr. Maduro has faced strong criticism from both America's friends and foes at an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. But domestically, too, the opposition Democrats have been staunchly critical of the action. They also say that the relevant members of Congress were not informed beforehand of the move, which they say is rare in U.S. military history.
Well, this briefing, while very extensive and long, posed far more questions than it ever answered. Their plan for the U.S. running Venezuela is vague, based on wishful thinking, and unsatisfying. I did not receive any assurances that we would not try to do the same thing in other countries.
The U.S. military operation in Venezuela was a decisive and justified action. Nicolas Maduro is responsible for the deaths of untold thousands of Americans after years of trafficking illegal drugs and violent cartel members into our country. This is undisputed, and everybody agrees with it. These are crimes for which he's been indicted in U.S. courts, and an arrest warrant was duly issued. And now he has learned what accountability looks like.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from Detroit by the Chief Republican Strategist, Errol Morkoc. Good to see you, Errol, and Happy New Year to you. I mean, shouldn't some members of Congress, at least those in the Congressional Intelligence Committees, who are often briefed on classified information by the administration, been briefed before the strikes on Venezuela took place? Because according to the U.S. Constitution, Congress must be involved in situations where U.S. armed forces are introduced to overseas attacks.
Absolutely, in a traditional conflict, we're supposed to have Congress involved. The president does have unilateral authority in the first 90 days. And in this case, while it might have been nice to share the plans with Congress, Congress doesn't really seem to provide a lot of value in the execution of any plans. All they do is seem to leak information. And ultimately, what we had here was a criminal arrest of somebody with an international criminal warrant out brought under international criminal jurisdiction. So the Trump administration's purview here is this was a law enforcement action and not a military action.
And I mean, are you happy that Nicolas Maduro is no longer the leader of Venezuela, but his deputy now is? Because it doesn't sound like fundamentally anything has changed.
Well, it's a two-pronged effect here. So we're trying to bring down the head of the snake, as you can see with Maduro. And we did that very effectively with no lives lost on our side, no aircraft lost. And he's going to face trial for his many open crimes that we have presented in court. Now, when you come to the operations of Venezuela, I think it's such a shock for the amount of kinetic force the U.S. was able to apply to extract the leader of Venezuela, that anybody there right now is basically like a mouse looking over their shoulder waiting for a hawk. So it's not entirely in the U.S.'s extreme interests to come in with a big invasion or to try to set up a shadow government, as much as we're curious perhaps to watch and see how they're able to work with us on the ground. Keep in mind, we're there only for the oil. When Hugo Chavez and the communists overthrew the government when Venezuela was one of the wealthiest countries in the world, they kicked out all the American oil companies. Those American oil companies paid for and still have the mineral rights and oil rights to that oil. They stole our oil and we went back to get it, just as President Trump has said. So regardless of who is going to be the acting short-term leader, it certainly isn't going to be them in the long term. And in the long term, we're there to get our rightful mineral rights back in the end. And if they want to be part of that, perhaps they can be. But ultimately, the Venezuelan people have a great opportunity here for actual change. And as we saw, the European Union, Brazil, many of the United States, obviously many countries did not recognize Maduro's victory as legitimate and called for more elections. So I think the best and most democratic thing to do now that the illegal usurper Maduro has been taken for justice is to potentially let the Venezuelans have their own election. And we'll see how that goes for them.
Well, I mean, it's just interesting that as you mentioned there, Maduro is not considered to be a legitimate president, and in fact, the White House had condemned the government in Venezuela 6 months ago, accusing it of having stolen the election, but now has decided to support the same government.
Well, it's a short-term situation. It's almost like wait and see. For example, the Nobel Prize winner, I don't want to mispronounce her name, she was unwilling to go on the ground in the early part of this thing. We had a plan for her potentially if she wanted to go and do that, and she didn't feel the conditions were safe enough. Right now, everybody who would be left there is going to be terrified, horrified, mortified of the same fate that Maduro had. So in the short term, while it might look a little bit interesting, it also is the least detrimental strategy to the day-to-day life of the Venezuelan people. There's no U.S. servicemen and women besides CIA on the ground. And more importantly, it doesn't really project to the world what we're doing. The confusion, the fact that we're here unable to quite put our finger on it is exactly what Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth want. They want nobody to understand what they're doing while they keep doing these things in the back door. Keep in mind, right before they took Maduro, Donald Trump deflected everybody's attention to Iran. He was posting about Iran, saying we're going to, if their protesters are attacked, if this and that is attacked, focus on Iran. Everybody's looking that way. He goes this way. Everybody's looking at the government sitting there wondering what's happening in the back door of the CIA, and everybody has a very strong plan. Unfortunately, I just don't know it, or else I would share it with you.
Well, I mean, Mr. Morkoc, I think what is curious for a lot of people who are international and looking into the United States is whatever has happened to the values of America that the world had so much respect for. I mean, we're hearing, for example, reports that the enforcement police in Venezuela are out on the streets ensuring that no one celebrates the removal of Mr. Maduro, and people are afraid because they're seeing an intact Maduro group still in power, people who are just as responsible as Maduro for many of the crimes that have been committed in Venezuela.
Yeah, and I agree with all of those points as valid and criticisms. I think one thing the United States can stand on is that repeatedly throughout history, we've toppled and brought down dictators, whether it be Noriega, whether it be Mr. Hitler, or whether it be, in the end, Nicolas Maduro. What Nicolas Maduro has done to his own people in terms of violence has been well documented, whether that's effectively Tiananmen Square-style armored vehicles running over protesters, caging and eliminating political opponents, international narcotics trafficking, let alone the catastrophic failure of his country's currency, which is stealing from the labor value of everybody, to the point where Venezuelans in 1 year lost over 21 pounds per Venezuelan. Now, here in America, we could probably use that. But in Venezuela, that wasn't a good statistic. They were eating zoo animals at one point. So I have no doubt that the thugs who have taken over what was the most prosperous country in Latin America or in South America and run it into the ground are going to have a final throw here, but the idea that people were able to be openly celebrating before isn't true either. So people who are happy that Maduro is gone perhaps should not be too ebullient in the streets yet. But the winds of change are upon them. America is off the coast, and certainly there is a chance for Venezuela to get back into the good graces of what would be its best customer and formerly one of its better allies. So I think then in the end you have Hugo Chavez and the communists come over, did what they did. The values of America, our values are anti-communist, anti-Bolshevik, anti-Soviet, anti-Iranian. And the Venezuelans were the opposite of that. In the end, the biggest thing here is Venezuela was providing oil to China that the U.S. couldn't cut off. Now we can cut it off. We don't want to. We want China to keep buying that oil all day. But that means that if China tries to move on Taiwan, then they have an issue supplying their economy. Same for Iran. So by cutting off these two unabridged actors, the United States geopolitical position against China has gone much farther. And as we see with Russia being bogged down in the Ukraine, they're unable to support their client state in Venezuela. So the United States did what was right for America, did what was right for the world, and did what was right for the Venezuelan people to free them from a bloodthirsty dictator who is now going to face charges and hopefully be brought to justice for what he's done to the world.
And I mean, do you think the US government has a strong legal case against Mr. Maduro in that New York court? Because virtually every international lawyer has called the seizure of Mr. Maduro a violation of international law.
Yes, it probably would be a violation of international law if the United States was at all interested in participating in these international legal systems or the International Criminal Court or whatever it is. Unfortunately, Mr. Maduro is being arrested in the 7th District Federal Court of New York City, where the charges have been brought. We took a narco-terrorist kingpin out of his state and have brought him for trial. And on that trial, we will be presenting evidence of gun running, of human trafficking, of operation of narco activities, as well as state-sponsored backing of known terrorists, including money laundering. And those charges will go against his wife as well. So my suggestion to the ex-president, if you want to call him that, is that he should be very well cooperating with the United States government with any information he might have against people who he has collaborated with in the United States, because right now he's going to receive the only fair trial in the Western Hemisphere that's available, and that is in a U.S. court system, and we wish him the very best of luck.
Okay, Errol, I want to thank you very much indeed. Thank you for joining us and for your analysis, which is always very informative. Thank you very much indeed. Errol Morkoc is the chief Republican strategist who was talking to me on the line there from Detroit.